Hello everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture. How are we all doing? Are we all excited for Christmas? I am very excited for Christmas. How has it been a whole year since the 60th anniversary celebrations? How? It blows my mind. It has been just over a year since we saw the Star Beast for the very first time. And we were getting all excited for the following week with Wild Blue Yonder, then the Giggle. Part of me feels like it was only yesterday, and then part of me feels like so much has happened since then that it feels like even longer ago than a year. It's a very strange feeling. So we thought that now that a year has passed, it would be a good time to kind of look back at the 60th anniversary, the build up to it, the events themselves, and kind of figure out, now that a year has passed, what worked, what didn't work, talk about our memories and our thoughts about that time in the world of Doctor Who. So let's go all the way back to 2021, which feels so long ago at this point. And it was announced that Russell T Davies was returning as showrunner. Now, although I've done a lot of videos for this channel now, back in September 2021, I had done a grand total of 1 video for WhoCulture. This was right at the beginning of my WhoCulture journey. So I didn't talk about it on the channel, we didn't have any sort of news discussion like we would have now, but as a fan of Doctor Who, I do remember being so excited that Russell T Davies was returning. Now, I'm not ashamed to admit, I was one of those fans who was perhaps not so interested in the Whittaker-Chibnall era, perhaps I'd got a little bit older, it was when I was at university, and so I kind of dwindled a little bit, my interest wasn't as high as it once was. But with the announcement of Russell T Davies coming back as showrunner, I felt like my childhood was beginning again. And I feel like that was the case for a lot of fans. Russell T Davies brought the show back in 2005. Many believe he saved the show, you know, he brought it back and it became a massive success once again. And with the show dwindling at that point in time, with Chris Chibnall as showrunner and Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor, it did feel as though Russell T Davies returning once again was going to be a really great thing for Doctor Who. And I guess I hadn't really thought about it until I just said it then, but yeah, my WhoCulture journey and the whole build up to the 60th anniversary and now was simultaneous. So I got to explore my joy and revisit my love for this show as we built up to the 60th with all of you guys, as my journey with WhoCulture began. So wow, I hadn't thought about it like that before. So then we jumped to the 8th of May 2022 and Ncuti Gatwa was announced as the next Doctor. Now interestingly, of course, we all thought that he was going to be the 14th Doctor. We had no reason to suspect that he wasn't going to be the next Doctor, the 14th Doctor. And of course the way they did this was with those emojis. And at the time some people felt, oh, they're just making announcements on social media. What happened to the TV event that was the announcement of the new Doctor? But I think in this day and age with social media being the way it was, this worked incredibly well, and we weren't expecting it. I remember this day so vividly. Again, I had been with WhoCulture for maybe 6 months at this point, and I remember this being such a big deal. We weren't expecting it, no one knew that an announcement like this was coming, and all of a sudden, I believe it was a Saturday, all of a sudden, or maybe a Sunday, it was a weekend, I'm pretty sure, everyone's phones were going crazy and we were all kind of scrambling thinking, quick, we've got to get this announcement now, what are we going to do? And I remember being absolutely terrified because I'd never done a video in this style before. I had done lists and I'd done voiceovers and things like that, but this form of kind of informal/formal video was something I had not done before. And the way that we did it was that we had a discussion between myself and Sean, and if you go back and watch that video, you can very much see that I fully was relying on Sean to lead that conversation. I spoke when spoken to. If I had a point to make, then I would make it. But I very much was leaning on Sean entirely for that video. But at the same time, we were so excited for Ncuti Gatwa to be announced as this new Doctor. You know, he is still an up-and-coming actor who is extremely popular, particularly with a younger audience. So it made perfect sense, and the excitement for him to be taking over with Russell T Davies returning as well was just so wild at the time. But then, throw a spanner in the works, because just a week later, on the 15th of May 2022, we have an announcement that David Tennant and Catherine Tate are returning to Doctor Who. What? 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 Now this video for our channel, the announcement of David Tennant and Catherine Tate was my very first solo news video for you guys. Luckily, David Tennant and Catherine Tate, to me, they're the best Doctor Who duo. When people ask me my favourite Doctor Who series, my favourite pairing, Series 4, by far, my favourite. Tate and Tennant, just pure gold. So it wasn't difficult for me to express my excitement in the video, and I could kind of use that to tamper down the nerves of leading my first solo news video for you all. Now, I think the thing about this announcement was, this was coming for the 60th, and while it was so exciting to have David Tennant returning, there is precedent for him to return for an anniversary special. We'd already had him for the 50th, so while it was exciting, it wasn't necessarily surprising. But the big surprise here was that Catherine Tate was returning. That was not expected. We did not see that coming. And of course, at this point, we didn't know that David Tennant was going to be the 14th Doctor. So there was so much speculation and so many questions about where in Donna's timeline these stories would take place. Was it going to be after Donna's mind was wiped, in which case how will that work? There was so much speculation, but also just so much excitement. I know that a lot of people, and in hindsight you can definitely see that this maybe was the case, but as I mentioned earlier, there was dwindling interest in Doctor Who at this point in time. Do I think that they brought David Tennant and Catherine Tate back to try and entice those lost audience members back? Yes, absolutely I do. Do I think that's a bad thing? Not at all. In fact, it probably actually, well, it did, it worked. There was so much hype, and a lot of people tuned in to see the return of these favourite characters and actors in Doctor Who, so it absolutely did work. If you've got something at your disposal and you can use it to make something better or to bring people back, why not do that? I don't see it as a bad thing. It was just all a very exciting time, and again, a time filled with speculation. We did not know anything about this. I remember seeing a lot of the behind-the-scenes shots and clips when they were filming in Bristol, and that in particular was so trippy for me because I studied at university in Bristol, and so the streets that they were using to double as London, I recognised them so much because I spent 3 years walking those streets, and there were restaurants in the background that I'd spent many evenings in, and it was just so strange and a little bit sad that they were filming where I went to uni, but I was like 4 years too late or whatever it was. And yeah, that was just so strange. And even when we jumped ahead to watching the episodes, again, the illusion was broken slightly when I go, that's not London, that's Bristol. And then the build-up just got bigger and bigger and bigger from then until we saw the specials. Myself and Sean had so many videos discussing what we thought might be happening. We had guests on the channel. We had the wonderful Christopher Monfett just before the first episode aired, just with our last-minute speculations and thoughts about what might be happening. I remember when the first full trailer dropped because I wasn't actually available to cover it for you guys, but I did refilm my reaction to it, and it was just... If you go back and watch that video, it's basically me just going the whole time because it was just so exciting. It felt like my childhood all over again, seeing the Doctor and Donna there on screen. It was just so exciting. So then we jump to November/December when we do get the anniversary specials. So starting off with the Star Beast. When this episode aired, there was so much joy in this house. So much joy and excitement. Because not only am I a big fan of David Tennant as the Doctor and Catherine Tate, but that is generally the consensus in this house that was the best era of Doctor Who. And my family had long since stopped watching, but they were all sat round ready to watch these specials. Seeing David Tennant and Catherine Tate was just amazing. So good. And I think that was what I focused on when we did the ups and downs and when I first watched the episode, and just amazing. So exciting to see them. It felt like they'd never been away. The chemistry between them is just so brilliant. They managed to explain how Donna couldn't remember, and it actually ended up becoming a really vital part of the story, which I think worked really, really well. If I'm being honest and jumping ahead to how I feel about it now, I think of the three, the Star Beast is probably the weakest of the three specials that we did end up getting. At the time of doing the ups and downs and watching the episode, obviously I couldn't compare it to the other two because we'd only seen one at this point. And I think the joy and excitement about the return of David Tennant and Catherine Tate perhaps clouded or overshadowed some of the other elements of the episode. And if you remove that excitement and you remove the fact that this was such an unexpected thing to be happening, the episode itself is okay. It's by no means bad, and I think compared to some of the stories that were in the Whittaker Chibnall era that I wasn't such a big fan of, it did feel like it had that Russell T Davies, just had Russell T Davies written all over it, but it felt like childhood. But I don't know if you remove the nostalgia elements of it, whether to perhaps new viewers it was as enticing. Again, by no means a bad episode. But I think if you remove the hype of it being the grand return of David Tennant and Catherine Tate, that's when you can start picking apart the story a little bit and thinking, did that work? I'm not sure if that worked. But in general, still a great episode.
What about your face? Why did it come back?
Does there have to be a reason?
Yes!
Then, of course, the next week we had Wild Blue Yonder. Now, with Wild Blue Yonder, I think it's perhaps maybe the opposite. When this episode aired, or before this episode aired, we knew that this was the one shrouded in the most mystery. We'd seen a lot of clips from episode 1 and episode 3 in trailers, and we knew that there was very little revealed of episode 2 of Wild Blue Yonder in any of the trailers. There was a lot of redacted elements to it, and a tease about who was going to be in the episode, and so there was so much mystery in the build-up to this episode that I think this is probably the episode that people were the most excited to see, because so much was unknown about what we were going to be walking into. Now, because of that, I think that after watching the episode, a lot of people were maybe a little bit disappointed because there was so much attention drawn to the mysteries of it. I think this is the episode people expected to see returning characters or cameos, because this was an anniversary, and so we have come to expect returning faces and things that don't usually happen in Doctor Who. Because of that, when we came into the 60th, everyone thought this episode is shrouded in so much mystery because there's going to be returning faces, because there's so many spoilery parts to the story that they just can't tell us anything without ruining it. But then we get to the episode. It stars just David Tennant and Catherine Tate. There aren't any returning faces or grand reveals until the end. I know there's more to come. But compared to the hype, I think because they made such a big deal out of the mystery, that kind of hurt it slightly. Whereas if they just left it and not bigged up the mystery so much, then people wouldn't have gone in with such high expectations and then left disappointed. Of course, the whole episode is saved by the fact that we do have the return of Wilf at the end of the episode, and it just... I love him. I just love him so much. And it's even sad in knowing that this was Bernard Cribbin's final role before he passed, and that he came back to Doctor Who, and he was just as lovable there as he ever was, and beautiful. Now, when you go to Wild Blue Yonder, opposite to the Star Beast, I think with a year passing, and without that pressure of all of the mystery and all of the secrets and hinting that went with Wild Blue Yonder, if you watch it now without all that, it's a really strong episode. It's a really clever episode. I think David Tennant and Catherine Tate do an incredible job playing two versions of the characters, but at a point where there are times where you don't know which is which, and they're brilliant. I think the effects, with the exception of perhaps one part, which I'm sure you will all know which part I'm talking about, looked incredible. My arms are too long. It was actually a very creepy episode. Spooky, creepy, body horror, fearing yourself. Actually, it was a really strong episode. And if you'd have asked me back last year, I probably would have said that one was my least favourite. But now I think it's my second favourite. The Giggle's still my favourite. But I think I definitely can appreciate it more now when I don't have the disappointment of all of those expectations I had that were fueled by the hinting and teasing that came from Russell T Davies and the showrunners.
Then I have a problem with the Joel.
Then we obviously had The Giggle. The Giggle is still my favourite episode of the three, I think. It just has that anniversary special feel to it. I think because there were 3 episodes, it was kind of difficult to... when there's just one special, everything goes into that one story and you can have all of the things that make it an event. Whereas with 3, it's kind of like if you do too much in the first episode, then you've got to keep upping that for each new episode. Also, the 3 episodes didn't necessarily link as much as I thought maybe they would. But this was the one that felt the most event-like, with the toy maker and unit. The stakes were higher. Now, I was very lucky that I got to watch The Giggle at a screening event in London with a room full of fans, and it was such an experience. It's one thing to watch it in your living room with your family, and I really enjoyed doing that with the first two. But to sit in a room full of fans who all appreciate the little Easter eggs and the references as much as you do is such a wonderful thing. It just felt like we were all here to celebrate something. And I feel like that maybe helped in the kind of anniversary feel of it, to be sat in a room full of people. I know that, people watched the 50th in the cinema, people watched other episodes in the cinema more recently. I haven't done that, but I do feel like watching it at this event definitely made it feel more of a celebration of the show. I think the highlight must have been when we had Spice Up Your Life and all of the petals came in the episode. We got showered in petals. And did it make me jump? Maybe. But it was still amazing. It was like a 4D experience. I still think, as I said, this is my favourite episode. And a year later, it still has that kind of event feel more than the other two episodes did. And then, of course, we did come to the whole bi-generation situation of the episode, and we got the answer to the question of how Ncuti Gatwa was going to come into the fold. I think at the time, the whole bi-generation situation confused me a little bit, and I was a little bit on the fence about it. I thought it was clever, but I just didn't fully understand what was happening. And so it was kind of hard to be able to give like a good review of it when I was struggling to understand it. But obviously now we've had time to think about it and figure out what this means. And if I'm being honest, I'm even more confused. It was a great concept to go with, and I think for the purpose of this, it worked really, really well. And you always want to, as showrunner, do something new with the show. Sometimes that pays off, sometimes it doesn't. I think now that we've had a year to think about it, people are starting to find holes in how this works. And I can appreciate that. It's one of those situations where I feel like, have they put as much thought into it as they perhaps should have? Because now you've done it once, you have to now explain if that doesn't happen again, why it didn't. And if it does happen again, how is this different to the last time? I like that it perhaps does open doors for past actors to perhaps return, or for parallel worlds where you can have, for example, Tales of the TARDIS. So those previous actors can return without having to explain why they look old. You've got this kind of multiverse situation going on. I do like that. I just feel like it can become a little bit confusing. Bi-generation for me is still a little bit in the air. I want to see where they go with it, if they continue with it, if there's more of an explanation to it. And I'll come back to you on my thoughts on that.
Bi-generation is supposed to be a myth, but
Look at me.
My thoughts on the 14th Doctor, David Tennant being the 14th Doctor. I love that we had David Tennant return. Do I feel like it was a little bit just like watching 10 again? At times, yes, but I also feel like he did a really good job of playing this version of the character that was familiar, but also you could see the areas of the character that were influenced and informed by the incarnations that have come since. For example, there was perhaps a little bit more emotion. He recognised himself that there were certain phrases that he might use that he wouldn't have before. And I really liked that. I think it worked to incorporate those personalities and traits of the incarnations of 11 and 12 and 13, so that we weren't just seeing 10. If it had been 10, I think it would have been maybe a bit confusing. I think in hindsight, him being the 14th Doctor and that whole situation was a clever idea. It does still seem a little bit confusing as to why. I know they did give an explanation as to why this face returned, but it also feels a little bit like a forced explanation as opposed to a really cleverly thought out, oh yeah. You know, it feels a little bit like an experiment for the show to perhaps bring back familiar faces to play a new version of the Doctor. Do I want them to continue doing that? I don't think I do. It's nice to see new faces. Obviously, David Tennant being one of the most popular Doctors, being my personal favourite Doctor, it was great to see him return, but I don't want it to become this thing that just keeps getting done, and then it makes the moments where it did happen lose their significance. And a lot of people have asked me this as well, do I want 14 to or David Tennant to return in the future, or 14 and Donna, now that they're kind of in their little living life bubble? Do I want to see them return? And the truth is, and this isn't news to you, I've said it plenty of times, but the truth is, I feel like it needs to be rested for a while. I'm not saying I never want to see David Tennant return again. If he returns like Tom Baker did in The Day of the Doctor, 20 years in the future, I'm not saying that I wouldn't be a puddle on the floor. Absolutely. I just feel like we need to give it a rest for now, because otherwise people are just going to get annoyed with David Tennant keep returning. And it will stop being a special, nostalgic feeling and start just being ratings are dropping, they've brought David Tennant back again. And I just don't feel like that's the direction they should go in. If they keep bringing David Tennant back, it just almost suggests an air of, or a lack of confidence in the person who is currently playing the role. And again, that's not fair. Give them a chance. A lot of people weren't a fan of David Tennant when he first started, but he earned their respect and he earned their admiration by just playing the role. And this is something that I think worked very well and something we don't get to see very often. Multi-Doctor story, but with a new version and their previous version. It's not like, I know we have had multi-Doctor stories before, but this was new. This was shooting out with David Tennant, newly regenerated. I did love that whole scene where they were working together. That worked really, really well, and I really enjoyed that. It's when you start getting to the nitty-gritty of what this actually means for the future of the show and the lore of the show that I start to get a little confused. But in terms of seeing the two of them bounce off of each other and work together as both versions of the Doctor, yeah, loved it.
Good luck.
I think at the time, perhaps we felt a little disappointed because of the tropes of anniversary specials that had come before, and because we didn't get that. For example, apart from Shooty Gatwa at the very end of the giggle, there were no multi-Doctor stories. I think sometimes people at this point have come to expect that, and it was a bit disappointing, as I said, for Wild Blue Yonder in particular, to have not brought that in, because the teasing suggested that we would get that. We obviously only got those 3 specials, and in my mind, the third one was the only one that really felt like an anniversary celebration. At the time, there was a little bit of disappointment, kind of going, is that it? I just feel like I've watched 3 more episodes of Doctor Who. I don't feel like I've watched an anniversary celebration. It kind of felt like bringing David Tennant back to them seemed like it was enough, which to some people perhaps it was, but to others, they're waiting for that event feel. They're waiting for the feeling they got when they watched The Day of the Doctor, and I don't necessarily think we quite got that with these anniversary specials. In a way, I almost feel like it would have worked better if there'd just been one really long special, rather than 3 individual episodes that for the most part just felt like 3 episodes of Doctor Who. But obviously then when you do look back at it, now we got loads. Compare the hype for Doctor Who a year ago to now. It's all anyone was talking about. I mean, I know that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it was everywhere. There was so much hype about it. There were trailers. I know it was the 60th, but compare that to now, when we've got a Christmas special coming in a month's time, and there's not really been that much discussion about it. So when you look at it, you kind of feel like in hindsight, we got given a lot for that anniversary special. Maybe we took it for granted at the time because we were a little spoilt, a little over-expectant, and didn't appreciate what we had at the time. You know, a lot happened beyond just those 3 specials as well. We had the launch of the Whoniverse, which perhaps at the moment feels like perhaps it's not as successful as they hoped it would be. But at the time, this was a big deal. Every Doctor Who related thing in one place for the first time, with the tease and the promise of more things to come in the future. I know at the moment it feels a little bit like that's a long way off, because you want things instantly and these things take time. We also had the return of Doctor Who Confidential in the form of Unleashed, which I personally was so excited about. I made a whole video about how Doctor Who Confidential was such a brilliant thing for me to watch. I enjoyed it so much at the time. I think I spoke about how it kind of made me it piqued my interest in wanting to work within the world of film and television. So to have Unleashed, that was really exciting as well. Of course, we had Tales of the TARDIS, which again I appreciate isn't available to everyone, but Tales of the TARDIS is one of those things where I think they realised this is an anniversary and we've not really done much to include anything other than David Tennant. And so they brought back those past Doctors in those little clips with their companions, and then sandwiched some of their famous stories together. Yes, maybe it was a little bit of a last minute, well, they admitted as much, it was kind of a last minute, we haven't done enough, we need to do it. And I appreciate that they did do that, because I think I probably would have felt even more so like, where was the celebration for all 60 years of the show if we hadn't had that as well. So I think Tales of the TARDIS was a good addition. So I guess what's really left to do here is for me to answer the question, was the 60th anniversary a success? I wish I could give you just a clear yes or no, but I think it's a little bit in between. I think in hindsight, yes, it was successful. But at the time, perhaps we felt that it wasn't as successful as we hoped it would be. Such is life a lot of the time. It's not until later on when you don't have something that you realise what you did have, and I think that's kind of the situation here. Were there elements of it that I still feel like weren't quite as great as they could have been? Yes. But by no means was it bad. I still think the 50th was probably better, but the 60th was also a gift, and I think we maybe didn't appreciate it as much as we should have at the time, now that we're sat here with nowhere near as much hype surrounding the show 1 year on. Don't get me wrong, we've had a lot happen since then. We've had the whole season 1 and there's been a lot going on, which is why when I try to think about it, I'm like, so much has happened since then. What was the 60th? But right now, this time last year, Doctor Who everywhere. And I miss it. I miss the hype. I miss the celebration. Bring on the 70th, that's what I'm saying. Bring on the 70th, and if I know Russell T Davies, he's probably got it planned in his head already. Let me know your thoughts on the 60th anniversary 1 year later in the comments down below. Was it a success? Was it not a success? And give me some actual answers and reasons behind your thoughts here, as opposed to just saying, no, it was rubbish. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.